Class number 2 of the EFL portion of the teacher training is, what do we call it? Well, I've called it so many things. I hope you don't mind. This is one of those things that you've heard of the expression both and this is both and. We could call this class specific gravity. We could call it the progressive development class. And we could call it the motivating children. I deliberately crossed that out and said, no, it's not just about motivating children, it's about motivating people. So these are all things that we're going to be discussing today. This is, to me, the core of Education for Life. To me, this part of the system is what is the most unique of any part of it. The next EFL class in January will be on Tools of Maturity, which is about teaching the whole child, not just the intellect, not just the body, but addressing feeling and will. And there are other systems that talk about teaching the whole child. There are other systems that speak of spiritual education. There is no other system that has its curriculum divided up into the 6 curriculum areas that we do. This is one uniqueness to EFL. But I feel that the central concept, the central core principle that we can always come back to when we are struggling in the classroom, when we're succeeding in the classroom, when at any time, is this concept of specific gravity, progressive development. Basically, it's a concept of energy, that we are really energy beings more than we are physical form. You know, this is getting, when I first came to Education for Life, and the book was published in '86, I was still struggling with this concept. But now it seems like it's being more and more accepted and understood generally. For example, how many of you have heard of Dr. Oz? Oh yeah, Dr. Oz. Some of us love Dr. Oz. He has a syndicated newspaper column, and you may have seen him on Oprah. And he is a physician. He's a physician, but besides being a Western trained physician, he is also very well up on alternative method, what we call alternative. In other countries, they are the method of healing. And for Ayurveda, he knows about Ayurveda. He knows about Chinese medicine. He knows about acupuncture. And he advocates all of those things, especially for preventive health. He's very, very successful, has best-selling books. And one of the things, he gets on the Oprah show, which goes to how many millions? I don't know. But he will say, your body is not a physical entity. Your body is an energy field. He has said that on Oprah at least once, I think many times, and it's in his books. So, but he's just talking about the body so far. And I don't know, I suspect he understands consciousness too. But, modern medicine, we know that. We know that the brain puts out an energy field. Recent research has shown that the energy field of the heart is even stronger than that of the brain, which is a very interesting concept. There's more and more being written about the heart and the heart's influence on the brain and the whole body. For example, when the heartbeat comes into what's called coherence, then automatically the energy in the brain changes to a higher level. Some of you remember from the Becky Bailey video, basically it's a continuum. It's not this clear cut, but the 3 different parts of the brain, from the reptilian, which is basically instinctual, fight or flight, up to the frontal lobes, which is the highest center. I'm so excited about this. I love it so much that I tend to start talking really fast. I get so jazzed. So if I'm going too fast for you, or if you don't catch something, please don't hesitate to say slow down, or to raise your hand and ask a question. In yoga teaches that the first reality is consciousness. And out of consciousness, pure thought, then that manifests into energy. And then from energy comes the physical manifestation. In other words, who you are was in existence before birth and will be in existence after birth. This is just the physical manifestation right now. And even if you don't accept that, as I'm saying, even science says that we are energy fields. I've been reading lately this fascinating book to me by Leonard Susskind, who is a physicist from Stanford, I believe. And I can't think of the exact title right now, but it's something like The Black Hole War, My Disagreement with Stephen Hawking. And it's, for me, I love this topic, and so for me it's fascinating. And I've never made it through the entire book on these physics books, like The Elegant Universe by Brian Greene, in which string theory is explained. Boy, I just love the first 4 chapters. I get so excited about it, and I never can finish them. But this one, I am almost finished because he combines a narrative with it, which is the whole, all of the people involved in physics in the past couple of decades, or even 3 decades, and their disagreements and their meetings and them as personalities and trying to come to truth, and how that happens, and how they disagree with each other, sometimes pleasantly, always passionately. And so the narrative part has kept me into it. But he goes, yes, Beth?
If it's hard to read the book, the PBS videos that they have on it is done in a way that the non-scientific mind can understand.
The Elegant Universe? Mm-hmm. Okay, she's talking about The Elegant Universe, but I'm talking about The Black Hole War.
Well, you mentioned The Elegant Universe.
Yes, and I didn't see that PBS series, and I'm so happy to hear it recommended. I'm going to see.
At the library.
The libraries probably have it, and so that would be very interesting. How many of you had a chance to read the 2 or 3 chapters from Out of the Labyrinth for this class? Great, fabulous. So you've probably heard, back in, when was it, the 70s, the first book that I can remember came out combining physics with the whole idea of consciousness, when it was the Tao of Physics. Do you remember that one? Well, this black hole war, and I'm not a scientist at all, so I know that I can't really explain this, but I'll tell you what I've gotten out of it, which is not only are we energy bodies, and of course we know there's practically no material reality there. It's all space. You know that, right? And it took me so many years to be able to really accept that, And I think the comparison that the author of Education for Life has been using in the last few years is to say, look at the blades of a fan when it's spinning and it looks like a solid entity. Well, that's the same as us. We're not solid. We're just, because there's an energy vibrating, it looks solid to us. I thought that was a great explanation. What you notice if you're a teacher and you talk to young people about these things, they have no trouble imagining it. It's just a reality for them. I think this next step might be a challenge for them. And not that I can really explain it, but he says that, how a hologram, when you see a hologram, the difference between that and just a painting on the wall is that you can walk all the way around the hologram, and from every side, it's 3-dimensional. So it's projected into being. It's projected into being from outside. There's these, however they do that, they project something, and it makes this hologram. But so the information's out here. The entity that you're looking at seems to be right here, but the information's out there. So is the entity really here, or is it out there? So, and he says, so think of Grant's tomb. Here's Grant in the tomb. In the same way, we as real beings, the information of Grant there in the tomb, the reality of that is out here on the sides of the tomb. But the tomb is encased in a building, so it's actually out there too. That's encased in the universe, so it's actually out there too. So we're all really holograms, and the information is everywhere. Center everywhere, circumference nowhere. Every atom in creation has full intelligence. Now, this is a really dumbed down explanation, but I find that so fascinating, and especially, and you're saying, what in the heck does this have to do with teaching kids, Usha? You are just being so esoteric. Well, let me tell you. There's energy flowing in the universe, streams of energy, and you know it. You get out in the traffic, Karen and I left at 9 a.m. yesterday. And so there was a stream of energy going up I-5. But Vidura and Bob left at what time?
2:01.
2:01. What do you think the stream of energy on I-5 was like when they hit Seattle yesterday? It was quite different, wasn't it? It was much more intense, much more of it. It was a different stream of energy. That's easy to visualize because it's right there in front of us. But there are also much more subtle streams. And they go through generations, certain generations. Let's go back to the land. Let's do that. Let's be anti-war. Let's be patriotic. There's all these streams of energy and consciousness flowing around, and we can tune into one or tune into another. What makes us happy, basically? Now, from the first class, I hope you remember that one of the principles is everyone desires happiness, and that the goal of Education for Life is what? What's that one word? Thank you, Rose. Say it out. Maturity. And maturity is what? Think about it for a moment. It's say it with me, the ability to relate appropriately to realities other than one's own. Okay? So, in the classroom, when kids are cooperating, working in harmony, they're relating to other realities than one's own, right? And when they are contractive, me, I don't wanna, I can't, get away, did I say that backwards? When they are cooperating, what did I say? They are
Expansive.
Oh, I used the right word. Okay, and when they're the opposite, it's contractive. And so basically it all boils down to this principle. You want to always help kids to be expansive. And when they're going toward contraction, you want to change the energy to help them expand. We can't in one step go from me to I love all creatures in all the earth, I'm everyone's friend. We can't go from I'm depressed, I don't like anything to lightly I fly when I live. It doesn't work. But we can take the next step in that direction. So what can we give a name to these energies just so we can talk about them? These are all, of course, it's anytime we try to define anything with words, we limit it, right? Love, that's totally limiting. It means something different to, well, it's totally expansive. But putting a word on it limits us. We all have a different concept of love. I'm sure the Dalai Lama and Mother Teresa and such saints have a different concept of love than we have, and we have a different concept than a 2-year-old has, right? So it's the same, but we need a vocabulary to talk about it. So, when we are the most expansive and including everyone in our reality and joyful, that energy we call light. And when we're the opposite, think about it, think about the language. We say we're depressed, we're down in the dumps. These feelings are universal to all cultures. Not all body language is universal to all cultures. For example, I think in some parts of India, this means yes. Correct? Is that correct? I think Telugu. Anyway, some part of India, this, or is it this? Anyway. But nowhere in the world does this body language mean, I'm so happy? Does it? When we're happy, smiles are universal, aren't they? So when we're happy, we say, I'm uplifted. I'm on cloud 9. Because this reflects a reality of energy in our own bodies. And those of you who know something about energy medicine, have any of you read Energy Medicine by Donna Eden? Or you know anything about acupuncture, or you know about Touch for Health, or Brain Gym, or any of those? You know that it's healthy when the energy rises, and we can even do muscle testing, and we can just do a simple thing. It's called zip up. We can do this on each other to our energy body, and you'll test strong. And then if I come to you and I go like this on your energy body, it will only last for an instant. You'll test weak. So it's a universal reality that energy moving up up into ultimately the frontal lobes brings us a higher consciousness, more joy, more light, more expansiveness. And the opposite is contraction into depression and negative consciousness, problem consciousness. We've all been there, haven't we? We all exhibit all these levels at different times in our lives, but most people have a specific gravity, one that they tend to settle into most of the time. And that's the word specific gravity. So the opposite of light is heavy. Okay, and then here's the sheer genius. We're not going to call what's in the middle medium weight. We're going to call it something that brings us even more understanding into the consciousness behind these energies. And that is, who knows it? Ego active. Now, like I said, this is a continuum. They're not three exact states. There's a whole continuum. And just below ego active would be contractive ego active. I'm using above and below, but I don't know that that really is an accurate. And just above, in energy moving up, is expansive. Speaking of energy, now if you look at your handouts, you'll see the very first one, progressive development and the motivation continuum. So, when you're in light, and when your energy is light, you're motivated to seek truth, motivated to help others. But then when you start getting to expansive ego active, motivated to help others, but also for self-gain. And you get on down into straight ego active, motivated for self-gain. And then going into contractive ego active, sometimes you can be motivated by rewards, but sometimes only by pain avoidance. And then heavy, motivated by desire to avoid pain, or unmotivated. Bruce Malner, who was a teacher at Living Wisdom School, once took some high school boys on a vision quest. Do you all know the concept of a vision quest? It's a Native American practice of, you take young men who are on the verge going from boy to manhood, and they would have to go out into the wilderness on their own and fast and commune with nature, and sometimes they'd receive their name or the spirits would talk to them, and they're old enough now to go out alone and endure. So several men took some high school boys on a vision quest, and Bruce was responsible for 3 boys. What they did was first night they all camped together, and then this was in the high Sierras, and then they spread out so that they had to be, each campsite, each individual's tent had to be not within sight of anybody else's, but the one adult had to know where, these 3 that he was responsible for were, and each day he would go walk by to check on each kid. So, and I don't remember how many days and nights this lasted, not too long, 2 or 3 maybe. And I don't know that they fast, I'm sure they didn't fast the whole time, but there were elements of all of that in it. And so here's what happened as he described it with those 3 kids. And one kid spent his entire time in the tent reading magazines that he had smuggled in that he was not supposed to bring. We weren't supposed to bring anything for entertainment. It's just you and the universe, So, and that's what he did. He just holed up in his tent and read magazines, slept a lot. Another kid, knowing a little bit about Aborigine practices in Australia, decided he would go on a walkabout. And every day he would go on long hikes and come back to the tent. And the third young man, one time when Bruce was out checking on the others, and he did a little hike, and he came back to his tent, and there in front of his tent was, in a mosaic formed with rocks, gray rocks and red rocks and black rocks and white rocks, was a mosaic art creation that represented he recognized it right away, a red-tailed hawk. And so this boy had spent the afternoon, or he'd spent probably the day before, collecting the rocks. And then he had come and made this beautiful, expansive, uplifting offering to his teacher, who he knew loved birds, and especially red-tailed hawks. Now, isn't that interesting? Now, each one represents a different reality, don't they? Of course, the thinking of others, the expansive is the light. Which one is the heavy? Lying around reading magazines. Well, I've done it, and we're not judging it. It's just a reality. And then the ego-active. Ego-active energy is characterized in the lower forms by a lot of restlessness. There's energy there. The kid's moving around, or the kid's talking, but it's restless. And then as ego-active gets more and more refined, it can be very concentrated. It can achieve great things. It can create huge businesses. It can do wonderful things when it's focused. But that's a higher form of ego-active. And then when the light energy, it can be manifesting physically, but it might not. For example, someone sitting and meditating who's really meditating, you know those Buddhist monks that they wire up their brains and they find that this part of the brain is all light, and that's where all the energy in the brain is. There's energy there. They may be sitting still, but there's huge energy, and an energy that's in communion with even a larger energy. Questions so far? Comments? When we use this term energy, we bandy this around so much in Education for Life. And let me just give you some other words that you can also think about that are related. You might even want to jot these down. I don't think they're on any of the handouts. These aren't exactly the same thing, but they're closely related. Spirit, consciousness, awareness, vibration, purpose, intention. Intention has a lot to do with it. Spirit, consciousness, awareness, vibration, purpose, intent or intention. Let's try something with intention right now. So, if this were a class of children, I would do a lot of discussing before we stood up about how you are not going to have your body touch anybody else's body, and how that some of you on the front row might need to step forward, and some of you in the back row could go behind your chairs, because what you're going to need is enough space that you can extend your arm fully outward like this, okay? So just stay, well actually you can go ahead and stand up, put your notebook on your chair, and let's do one with an intention. First of all, I'd like for you just to stand facing forward and extend your arm, whichever right hand or left hand, whichever hand is your dominant one. Look at your thumbnail. And now, turn around to your right, watching your thumbnail as far as you can. Come on, Kadri. As far as you can. And notice, then, when you get as far as you can, mark that spot by looking at what's behind your thumbnail. Whether it's a spot on the wall, it's a flower, a tree, a certain person. We hope that person doesn't move. Nobody move. All right, and come back to the front. And relax. And let's shut our eyes for a moment. And visualize yourself in doing that. Visualize your energy and your spine and your rotation around again. And this time, visualize yourself going beyond the point where you stopped before. A little bit further, a little bit further. Relaxed. And open your eyes, and let's do it again. Extend your finger, look at the thumbnail, and go around. As far as you can. And come back. Simran, why are you laughing? Tell us.
Because it went much further.
How many of you went further? It's not ever unanimous, but it really works. Now, we don't want to be unbalanced, so let's do our left hand. And around. And hold it for a minute because we're only going to do it once, so we'll hold it a little longer. All right, and you can sit down.
Who should play banjo?
No, I mean, I don't know where I first learned that, actually. Yeah. One of the things, actually, if you turn in your notebook to the next page, you'll see you'll see a lotus. This is our new way of trying to depict visually this whole concept of progressive development. So, in the middle is the contractive heavy state. You might want to write heavy under me. It's all about an energy level that doesn't want to put out any energy, right? And the next step from that is, yes, I'll do it if there's something in it for me. You know, what's in it for me? I'll do my homework because I want straight A's because I get a lot of praise. Or I'll do my homework because whatever the external motivation might be. Might not be because I enjoy learning and I enjoy cooperating. It might be for some reward. But then you get beyond that, a little bit beyond me, and we do it for our families. And a little bit beyond that, we do it for our community. And a little bit beyond that, we identify with our country. There's a strong element of that in our country right now, isn't it? You know, the rest of the world, go away. We want what we have right here. We're going to hold on to it. A lack of expansiveness to expand the consciousness beyond that all of us are brothers and sisters on this planet Earth. So when you get out into that petals, what is that? That's helping others. It's about everyone. It's not only even about all brothers and sisters on the planet, but it's about all creatures, all life. And then beyond that, everything. If everything has consciousness, we respect everything. There's an ultimate respect there. When we're helping children, and this is another thing I don't know that this is unique to Education for Life, but it's certainly I haven't heard it other places, and it's certainly a central principle, and that is we don't dwell on that you don't do these things that are selfish and contractive. You don't lie and you steal. You know, stealing's pretty contractive, isn't it? We don't dwell on, you don't do that because it's a sin and you're going to go to hell, do we? No. Why don't we do that? Because ultimately, does it lead us to happiness? Does it lead us to harmony? And in our classrooms, this is something that, especially as the children get older, but even kindergartners and even preschoolers can learn these concepts, that when we work together, we're happy. When we don't call each other names, when we look for the good in each other, when we help each other out when we're in trouble, we're happy. So that central concept that we do these things because they lead what? To our ultimate fulfillment as potential as human beings, yes, but that doesn't say much to a child, does it? But because ultimately it makes us happy. I think Sandy is a genius in working with kids who are leaving the feeling years and about to go in the will years. That means they're 10 and 11, 12, turning into 12. In this way. And I've seen her when some issue came up in the classroom. Like one time I remember, and these things happen, these happen in the most wonderful, perfect school, right? If they didn't, what would we be doing? And we wouldn't need to be here as teachers. So one time, someone sneaked into the kitchen and put a mustache on somebody's artwork. And maybe even wrote something not flattering. I can't remember that piece, but they certainly put a mustache. And so seeing how Sandy worked with the class on that and gathered them together and talked about, how hurtful this was, but not in a way that was, you bad somebody, you really hurt somebody's feelings, but was rather in an attitude of, whoa, somebody was feeling feisty and thought that would be cute and made a little mistake, but that's why we're all here together, is to learn from our mistakes. And I know no one wants to really hurt someone else's feelings. They didn't realize, they weren't thinking about how that would affect them. I know you all, I know your potential. I've seen how you can treat others, etc., etc. So it becomes a mistake rather than the word sin comes to mind, but practically, none of the parents that send kids to our schools would really use that word, but they certainly will scold, and maybe not meaning to shame the child, but it actually does. And another point that brings up in my mind is about not skipping stages, that when you're in the heavy stage, you can't skip, I mentioned this, you can't skip to light. And if you try to force a child in a heavy stage to do that, you're doing more harm than good. Because then they can even resent the action you want them to. For example, this is one of my pet peeves. It's when someone has done something really contractive and selfish and mean to another child, and the parent says, you apologize right now. Come on, you're going to go apologize. Well, if that person's in this stage, me, they deserved it, they started it, and you ask them to do a light thing, which is to understand that other person's reality, they might say, I'm sorry, but they don't feel any expansion or joy from it, do they? So we want to help. So this brings the next big part of this class. When we have this information, how do we help children get to the next step? But going back to your assignment for today, and we did have a written assignment, which I do want to take up if you brought the written assignment, which was the number 1. Won't go back to it right now, but I do want you to hand that to me at the break. But a reading assignment for today was to find the part in the chapter that tells you what are the signals of which one of these energy levels the children, the class, or a child is in. What are the signals? Did anybody find that page, and can they tell me what some of them are? How do we tell? Some of you maybe have perfect intuition, and you just know. The rest of us are learning, and we have to kind of look for external signals.
Posture.
Thank you. What page was that, Patricia? 88. And number 1 was body language. Remember this one? Conversely to this, upright posture, open chest. Those of you who teach young ones, don't you know some children that when they move, when they go to the bathroom, they don't go to the bathroom like this. Here's how they go. Don't they? They're almost floating like a feather, light as a feather, because the joy is just flowing through, the expansiveness is just flowing through. And in fact, that's why a lot of people love our schools, is because they're still doing that when they're 10 and 11. Conversely to some other schools, by 10 and 11, it isn't that way at all. We had a Korean woman, the wife of a pastor of a Baptist church, come visit the school Thursday morning. And she wants to, for the past 3 or 4 years, we've had Korean children come from, to stay with aunts and uncles and other relatives to learn the language better, to learn English better. And we have allowed some of them to come to we think we've had 5 or 6 total Korean kids, and they add so much to our classroom, and it's so expansive for our children to meet someone who speaks another language and their language not as well, and to have to open their hearts and minds to another reality and different foods and all of those things. So it's been a win-win for us. She wanted to bring 10 kids. So I don't know about 10 kids, but the point of bringing the story is that when she went in Sonali and Karen's classroom, I said, come on, let's walk through. And we walked through, and one group was over here. They were doing some sort of game, but it was an instructional thing that they were learning. What were you all doing with those little cards?
Sign language. We were playing Go Sign.
Sign language. We were playing Go Sign. They were all learning sign language. So it was very, it wasn't absolutely quiet because they were playing a game, but everybody was really engaged. And we walked out, and she turned to me. And before we even went, she said, your school was recommended to me because it's cozy. That was the word she said. It's cozy. And we walked out, and she turned to me, and she said, their faces. I said, really? What about them? And she said, I just sort of nodded. She said, their faces. They're all smiling. It's not like that in other schools. Whoa, in 1st and 2nd and 3rd grade, it's not like that? That is so sad. And I remember in Nitai's book, The Art of Joyful Education, which was published way before Education for Life. It was in the early years, 70s, I think. 76 maybe that came out. And that was one of the things he said. He said, when you go in a classroom, you can judge what's happening by the joy level. Oh, really? Come on, give them a test. But a test measures one thing. And real learning, real expansiveness, real leading to a joyful person, you can tell by the joy level. So in order for us to know what do we do with these energy levels, we need to know what motivates each energy level. So if you want to turn to the next page, you have some lotuses there. I'm sorry. Let's come back. Let's finish this. What are our signs? How can we tell the energy level? Yes, Marcia.
Downward gaze.
Downward gaze. And this works with adults too. How many of you, if it hasn't happened to you yet, now start looking. You know how it is, you learn a new vocabulary word and suddenly you see it everywhere? Okay, notice this. If you're ever in a group of people in a meeting, and all of a sudden you notice everybody's looking at the floor like this, guess what? You've lost them. The energy's heavy. And I'm skipping all around here because it all relates to everything, right? So what do? I'm going to give you right now. How do you motivate kids or people from heavy to ego active? And I heard somebody say it. Movement. Intense activity of some kind is what's needed. So getting them to move. So, okay, it's time for a bathroom break. Okay, it's time for tea. Okay, everybody, let's stand up and stretch. Or maybe, you also have to look at what just happened in the meeting that made everybody's energy go to the floor. This works with all people. So, Lenny.
So I have a very good example.
Oh, good.
Something happened yesterday actually in my class. We was doing a child into thinking questions, and I said today, well, we have been working so much with vocabulary, and I would be like everybody thinking questions in Spanish, and we can work in each one. Well, I don't know what happened with the energy that day, but two of our kids start crying.
Whoa.
Crying, and they are like how they can't really thinking and anytime they, so I went in there and say, okay, well, thinking in English about question in English, they can't, they are just tears and tears. So I said, okay, I think it's time to everybody put the pens down and everybody come in here, and I'm putting them in a circle, and we are going to start playing a game when I know that everybody can do it because we have been doing colors and numbers. So I know that every kind of child knows this. So we went in the game, and in the end of the game, pretty much everybody was completely fine. So it was like that was the point to show me, okay, energy is so low right now, and things are really, so everybody put their stuff away. We want to stop doing it, and let's go concentrate and move.
Can I recap that in case the video didn't catch it all, okay? And that is, she did an activity that they were supposed to come up with questions, and they found it very challenging. For whatever reason, some kids were even crying because they didn't feel they could do it. And so she said, whoa, okay, energy's going like this. It's contracting, it's not expanding, is it? Okay, what do they need to do? They need some activity. Put your pens down, and she thought of a game they all knew how to play using a concept they knew. She got them up and moving, and everybody was fine. Another example I can think of that, and that's an Education for Life teacher. Let me tell you. What an Education for Life teacher is not is, this is the lesson plan, sit up straight, get a hold of yourselves. Come on. Paragraph 2. Come on, it doesn't really matter. Why are you so upset about this? Come on, let's get paragraph 2. That's not an Education for Life teacher, because what's happened to their receptivity? Can you reason with people when they're going this way and they're into heavy? Not even us. I mean, think about your moments of complete. There's no reasoning. Words aren't going to do it. Yes, Johnny K. Davy.
As you were saying that, I felt my whole insides go together.
Really? Yes. Yeah, you can, if you're sensitive to energy. And that's the last thing we're going to put on this list, is that ultimately you can feel this through your own intuition, and but the more sensitive to energy you become, you even feel it in yourself when you're with a child. You don't have to look at these external signals. But on page 88, if you have a book, take a look. If you didn't find this part, I want you to look at it, or put page 88 in your notes so you'll know. I want you to go back and read this. It's so important. Body language is number 1. What's number 2?
Choice of friends.
Choice of friends. I don't know if it's 2, but it's definitely one of the 3 or 4 in there. What does that mean, Leslie? Do you care to expand on that? Oh, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Who the person resonates with.
Who they resonate with. Isn't that a nice energy word? Resonate with. When vibrations come out, you know, and certain, you can have a bass booming, and certain metallic objects will even start vibrating with them. It's a great way to think of it. Who do they resonate with? You get a brand new child in a classroom, really in a few days you can tell a lot about them by who are the kids they're drawn to play with. Are they drawn to play with the lightest kids, who are the most uplifted and expansive, or do they go right over there to the contractive, negative kids? Now, this is not an absolute, because kids will associate with other types bringing them up, you know, just being a friend to them regardless. But you could still tell a lot. And what's another thing? Sonali, oh, you don't have the book. Patricia, do you see another one on that page? Anybody?
Observing their play.
Observing their play. Is it concentrated? Is it expansive? Or contractive?
Should I have a question?
Yes, Beth.
Does this sort of go the same with children who might have special needs, or learning disabilities, or handicaps, and what the coin term is at the moment?
Tell me what you're thinking.
Well, I mean, especially with observing their play, I think sometimes a child may feel light and happy, but they're not going to necessarily be playing, you know, with others a lot because they're inside themselves. You know, that's what they're.
Exactly. Exactly. And he points out the fallacy between saying, okay, an outgoing child is a light child, and a quiet, introspective child is not, because they're quiet and they're introspective, they're not as reaching out to others. That may not be true. They may be reaching out in their own minds to truth. They may be contemplative type. But that's a very good point, and that's why the 5th one here is going to be your own intuition. And the other one is how they react to challenges. Do they rise to challenges, or do they contract? And this, well, not in general, a child will have a certain energy about challenges, but also in certain areas. We all have lighter energy in some areas. You know, Vidura and Karen and Beth, when it comes to handwriting, they are very light. And some of us might feel, oh no, not handwriting. Some of us, when it comes to PE, oh no, I have to move my body. Somebody else, math, I've got to do math. So each person has an overall specific gravity, but it also varies according to what the activity is and also what's happening in your life. So I want to bring up that one in particular because a lot of times we can misread a physical problem for heavy energy, and that kind of relates to what you were saying, Beth, a little bit. But so, for example, I know one day I was driving when I lived in Nevada City, California, and I was driving down the road, and I saw this child who was in my class walking home, and his body language was like this, and this was a child I considered a very light child, like this, and I thought, what's the matter? What happened to him? And then I realized, oh my gosh, it's spring, it's pollen season. He has bad hay fever. He doesn't feel well. And a lot of times what we've noticed in the more years that we're doing our school in Portland, the more that Karen, Sandy, and I and the other teachers have found that the first thing we need to look at any time when a child gets down into heavy energy is, are they hungry and are they hydrated? Because some of these children, especially, you know, here's another term that's bandied about, indigo children, but there's some truth in it. The more sensitive they are, the more they react when their stomachs are empty. And some of them, the 3 meals a day does not work for them. They can't stand it when their stomach's that full, and they can't stand it when it's empty. And if you think you can say to them, just have some willpower and wait, you haven't dealt with one. They can't.
10 minutes till snack.
Yeah, they cannot wait. And you're just teaching to the sky and the ceiling if you think that you're just telling them to wait will work. And they don't know they're hungry. That's the worst thing. They don't know. I can name names of kids we have right now in every grade who, look, they're smiling and nodding, these teachers, who all of a sudden they don't want to cooperate and they don't want to do it. And Karen said the first thing she says, if this happens early in the morning, did you eat breakfast? What did you have for breakfast? And she finds out, oh, I had some sugar cereal, or, oh, we were too busy, I wasn't hungry. Go get your lunch and eat something. This one is so, do you need to add anything, Karen and Sandy? Because you're both going like this, like, I can think of stories. Seriously, do you?
Well, just one example, we were recently, we were going to do this little writing assignment, and most of the kids just leapt right on it. We'd been to the pumpkin patch, we'd had a really good time, so they were going to write about it and make a picture about what they enjoyed about it. And, everybody but one just went right over there and got on it, and the other one sitting there with a clipboard going, ugh. And so you just go over and talk, and, I was trying to jolly her into it for a few minutes, and then I went, duh, and said, did you eat breakfast this morning? No, we were busy. Dad didn't have time to, fix me anything, blah, blah, blah. And so I said, go get your lunchbox. And she said, I'm not hungry. I don't want anything. Go get your lunchbox. I'll come with you. So we went and got her lunchbox, opened it up, eat this, and, 5 minutes later, Miss Perky again. And then it's like, okay, now, start your writing. Okay.
I can't tell you how much time I've wasted as a teacher not figuring that out. Sandy, did you?
It reminds me of the year I had 4 junior high boys, and we went to Washington, D.C. Bob went with us. It was a fun trip. And, me, I've got all this pitta, and if I'm on a trip, I can go all day without eating. I could just forget about it. And most of the kids were that way, too, but we had one boy, very Vata, and he was our barometer. And so if we were going along, and as soon as he started fading, that was my cue. It's time to have lunch, time to have a snack, time to sit down and get water or do something like that. And so, you find those sensitive ones in your class, and they can really help you, especially if you're a person who can forget about those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the kapha part of your nature, though, that can keep going without eating. Yeah. Yes, and the kids, I see it with water, too. Sometimes I've walked in right after recess, especially on a hot day, and the teacher's reading to the kids, and nobody's listening. They're quiet, but they're like, have they had water? We don't have water fountains at our school, so one of the essential things in their school supplies is a water bottle. And every morning, first thing they do, they get there and they fill it with filtered water and give them a lot of opportunities to drink. So, we're holistic beings, obviously, and everything affects everything else. And so I'm telling you this, it's not rocket science, is it? And yet, how many times we forget, because we have an agenda. Here's what we're going to do today. And I put all this time into bringing all these plans, and they don't want to do it. What are you going to do? Well, you're going to get your lunchbox, go with you, because why waste your time if there's no receptivity? Or you're going to say, put down your pens, let's play a game. So much of being an Education for Life teacher is working with the energy to bring the energy in a place where there's receptivity to what you have to teach. And that's why we don't have to go over and over and over and over again every year the same concepts. Like I think I mentioned to this the first class of, you look at some of the textbooks that the kids have to endure, and it's the same thing every year. The same old stuff. And it's like, well, do kids really have to have it repeated that many times? Well, not if you're working with the energy and they're receptive the first time, but a lot of them don't hear it the first, second, or sometimes any times. So next thing is, okay, what the last thing is the teacher's intuition. As time goes on and you work with these concepts more and then you observe more in yourself and in others, not just children, but in others, you'll become more attuned to it and you'll be able to feel the kids' energy and you'll start to notice more. It's hard when you're teaching and you're responsible for leading the whole group forward and teaching them this material, and so-and-so's hungry and let's go get their lunch, and so-and-so went to the bathroom and never came back, and there's so much happening and it's so challenging. So don't be too hard on yourselves about the mistakes you make, but you do get to integrate it, and it does become just part of the way you are. And certainly what helps is your spiritual practices. The more time that you spend meditating, the more time you spend in uplifted energy and stillness, you start to feel your own energy and you start to feel things more. You become more sensitive. Sometimes you wonder, why am I so sensitive? I can't. But that sensitivity makes you so much better of a teacher. And then once you know what the energy level is like, what do you do to motivate them? Children who are light are motivated to help others. You can write this on those blank mandalas if you want to. They're motivated to seek truth. Usually they like learning. They like knowing new things. They like being cooperative. It makes them joyful and happy. And in the center you have the heavy energy. You know, these are heavy, ego active, and light. You know, we used to do this like this. This was heavy, this was light, and this was ego active. But to me, I never quite liked that, and finally I was able to articulate, because you still, up here, you're still contained in something. And it's not like that. It's more expansion on into the universe, expansion into all realities. And this implies it's going to just keep on going, you know, into cosmic consciousness. So out here is the light energy, and here is the heavy. And those people are motivated to avoid pain. So in other words, they're not motivated by much. Okay, if I'm going to get my driver's license taken away, if I don't make all A, B's, and C's, teenagers are like this, aren't they? In the next chapter is on stages of maturity. You'll find out that so much energy in a child in puberty physically goes into the lower chakras that a very light child can suddenly become heavy, because so much of their energy is not free to be up here anymore. And so at that, you know, sometimes you have to use dire things with a teenager. If you fail another class, you will not have your driver's license. That gets most kids motivated. They don't. When we say avoid pain, we're not talking about beatings. You know that, right? Okay, and then ego active is motivated by what? Anybody?
Reward.
You do what you say.
Rewards. Now, this brings up a controversial topic, doesn't it? Any of the educators in here know what I mean?
Children should be good for nothing.
We're going to bribe the children to do what they ought to do, and even some people have done studies and tests to show it's actually counter to what you want when you give kids rewards. They become worse, not better. There's a whole movement of people, and I know we have parents in our school. One of them said to me, I was totally against rewards until I had a child. Reality is different. But what it is you have to be discriminating. If you use rewards for light children, yes, you can bring them down. I always remember this kid I had, and I'm going to say his name because it's ago. He had such a great name, Joe Frost. I love that Frost. And he was such a learner. He loved school. He was so self-motivated. He always went beyond what was required. He was just a great student. He left my class in something like 8th or 9th grade and went to a public school. And the public school had a lot of discipline problems. And so they had gone, because they had all this discipline problems, and he'd swung out to this liberal, oh, kids will be good if we appeal to their best natures, and the light kids will, but the kids who are motivated by rewards are not going to. And they had discipline problems to the point they'd gotten this real disciplinarian in there who implemented completely behavior modification. Everything you did got points. Every little thing you did got positive points. And he, by the second week, he had more points than anybody in his grade. And he totally lost his motivation. He totally lost his motivation. So you really have to be discriminating about this. And that's a whole topic to discuss. All of these things, I don't want you to get scared. You have all year. You're going to be working on these. We're going to be revisiting this topic and talking about how it works. Is anybody hot besides me? I guess you're not. You all have coats on. I'm just pumping the energy out here. Okay. So I'm wondering right now if Sandy would mind coming up and telling a little bit about how she uses class points to help the ego active kids in her class.
Yeah, one of the things that we do is I introduce at the beginning of the year class points. And class points are essentially whenever the class as a whole is doing something, I don't know, they're just like all together. I tell them it's those moments that I stand back and I go, wow, look at everybody's just, they're engaged, or they're helping, or they're on the right track, or if we get a compliment from another teacher or an adult, an unsolicited one, has to be an unsolicited one, and or moments like that where I find, boy, people are just really on track, they're in the groove, then I'll give them a class point, and it takes them, they have to get 100 class points, and then they earn a party, and I give them a whole afternoon from lunchtime on. They can plan it. I turn the pen over to the class, whoever the secretary is for the day or the week or whatever. I step back to the back and I give them 20 minutes. I said, plan your party. And they virtually can do anything. We've done all kinds of things. We've gone places. We've had luau's. We've gone to swim centers. We've gone to, it's just whatever they come up with. And they can make happen themselves. So they love the idea of that. And a lot of times it's really just to get the energy moving in the right direction and to give them confirmation to know when they're on the right track, because sometimes they don't know, and the lighter children will, it either just kind of rolls off them or they become leaders for the whole thing, or they're into helping the class as a whole get to their goals, so they'll be helpful in that way. And the ego active kids, are really into it. It's like, yeah, we're going to do this so we can get that, and the heavy ones usually get just pulled along by sheer momentum from everyone else. So it gets everybody on the same page and working together toward a goal. And what generally happens is after about, a few days even into the school year, we start forgetting about them. I don't have to give them, and we'll forget about them for weeks at a time, and all of a sudden, and nobody seems to notice because they're all kind of gotten in the habit. They understand, and then they feel what it's like to be in that cooperative mode, into that energetic mode where they're all doing, and then it becomes its own reward. And, the number will stay up there on the board in everybody's view, but we all forget about it. And so they kind of move to a higher phase of it. And so that's the way we move in that direction. And the points have to be unsolicited too. So they can't ask for them. And occasionally, so for example, if we're doing a journaling activity, and everybody's just, every pencil's moving, and everyone's quiet, a lot of times I'll just silently, I'll go up and, change the number, and some kids will notice, and they'll go, and then they get right back to it. Some kids don't notice until later, and occasionally, if I feel like it's been a problem to get them to do something, I might say, just letting you know I'm giving you a class point. Everyone's quiet and focused. Thank you. Just a brief acknowledgement if I feel like they wouldn't know what it is. And very rarely, I might even do something like, say we're in a transition, we're at circle time, and we're going to get up and go to our desks and take out a notebook and a pencil. And we've been challenged with that lately. So I might say, okay, I'll give you a class point if we can get up quietly, get into our seats, get your notebooks and your pencils out within the next 30 seconds or so. Okay, let's give it a try. And if they fail, it's like, oh, wow, we were so close. We'll try it again another time. So there's never, and I never take them away once they earn them. They're theirs. And so it's not a punitive sort of thing. And occasionally they can say, oh, can we get a class point if we do this? And, if it's done ahead of time, sometimes we'll say, oh, okay, that'll work. But they know if they're doing something really well, sometimes they'll kind of look at me and they'll look. But they know if they ask, can we have a class point? Oh, that totally negates it, because then it gets into that gimme, gimme, gimme sort of energy. And so I find, and they get it really quickly. And I find it really helpful in just getting them in the right habit. Because, sometimes the school year can start off really nicely. And, things start getting familiar. And sometimes things start kind of going downhill a little bit. Or they get off track into a wrong direction. And then, if I come back to it, and it's just a reminder. And they're like, oh, okay. And it can just really shift the energy in the right direction. And I know there's one that I actually learned, I think it was from you, Usha, and that was really, and this is for the really, really, really challenging kids, and this is more for the ego active ones. I know there was a period of time, so say you have a half-hour period, and 5 marks go on the board, and it's like, okay, every time I'm interrupted, I'm going to erase one of these. And if we erase them all, we might have to, you might have to owe me 5 minutes of recess or something like that. And boy, they start seeing those points go away, and they become really aware of their own behavior and whether they're interrupting or things like that. And that's the really heavy one that you pull out rarely. I think I've used that maybe twice in, I don't know how many years, 7 years here or something like that. But you will have those years where you have that child that cannot keep his mouth closed and is constantly interrupting and really taking away from class time. And so, you pull that out, and all of a sudden, oh, the whole class is really helping that child not to interrupt anymore. So, it's just a way to get the energy moving in the right direction. And like I said, at some point you let it go, and it goes away for a while. And usually by that time, I have to think, oh, I do want them to have a party by spring break, so let's see. I better find some ways to get them points right away, and then we get on it, and then they earn their party, and that's how I use class points.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. Sorry for that question. So, at what age children could be aware of such situations, and when would you try this?
That's a good question.
I was going to say, for the younger children, a rocks in the basket trick is better, because we're talking about a long-term goal, and younger children need something more quickly. So I have an article that one of our teachers in Palo Alto wrote called Rocks in the Basket. And some of you who have taken this class before, you have that handout. And so I was actually going to say that for the younger children, you don't do such a long, distant thing. That's for the older kids only. Younger kids need their reward. They need a visible reminder, something visible quickly. But the point that I want to emphasize that Sandy brought up is that your goal is to drop the rewards. And it works, because it becomes, once the energy gets flowing for a child, it becomes self-rewarding, having your child brush their teeth every night. It just gets to be a habit. Once they have that reward for a while, all of a sudden they don't even ask anymore. I know I had one parent who took this class, and she had so much trouble with her son getting up in the morning and getting ready to go to school, and would make his sister late all the time. The sister was ready, and the sister minded being late. And she thought I'm offer him a reward for doing what he ought to do, get up in the morning. Okay, I'll try it. So she said, if you'll get up on time without complaining. That's a big one, teachers and parents. Always add without complaining. You can't just be doing it, that you have to pull them along while they... And I'll get you a treat after school. We don't ordinarily recommend using food ever, but that's what she had, there's so many other things that to make positive in a child's mind. One of my favorites is I'll read aloud to you an extra 10 minutes. And they love that, and it becomes even more positive. Being read to is even more positive. So she was stunned the next day when it worked, and the next day when it worked. And then the third day, she's driving up home, and she says, "Oh, I forgot to get your treat." And he said, "Oh, it doesn't matter. That will happen." It's like you want to use the rewards to help the child do something that they almost want to do. They just don't have it in themselves, and you're just helping them over that hump. I look back to my childhood, and every time this comes up, I think about this for some reason. Bless my mother; she was wonderful in so many ways, and they couldn't afford it, but they gave me piano lessons, and I didn't like to practice. I just didn't. It wasn't creative enough to practice, and so for years I would be nagged to practice, nagged to practice, nagged to practice, and then finally I was old enough I was able to quit piano lessons, and I missed it so much. I really wanted to. I liked music, so I asked to take again, and even after when I asked to take, I still couldn't practice. And I just think if I'd been offered a reward, I remember being about 5 years old, and my sister was in high school. Couldn't have been in high school, must have been a little older than that. She was 9 years older. And I was asked to play the child part in the high school play. And it was this dramatic part where I had to run out because something had died. And one day my mother and my sister said, when I was practicing at home, "Do you cry like that when you do it in rehearsals?" And I said, "No. I wasn't going to make a scene of myself." And my mother, and this was the one time I ever remember being bribed. And my mother said, "I'll give you $1 if you do." Well, I'm old enough $1 meant something, And that night, I was such an effective actress that the director rushed backstage after I went off and said, "Are you okay?" And then from then on, I didn't need to be paid. This was great, They believe, I was an actress. And so it's just that little help. And so with the piano, I think back, if she had just done what our teacher Helen did with her son who studied guitar and ended up being accepted, he had to audition, but he was accepted to the Magnet School for Arts and Communication in music as a jazz guitarist. But when he was young, there was a reward for the practice. And I just think if I just had that reward, it would have helped me over that hump. And like him, I would never have been a pianist, but I might have gotten better, So you want to think of it in those terms. Not that this is going to happen forever. And you don't want to offer something that the child can't do. Only if you know they can do it. You don't want a failure. You want a success. Did you?
I think I might
Priya?
add something to that because I actually really feel that system works with points. I did that with my third graders. That's how young it is. But and one thing to add to that is to keep it fresh. And so we used to put our groups into, let's say it was Valentine's Day or it was that month, February, and I would make the seats into the LOVE so that they were in different groups
Aw.
in a different actual shape. And so every month the shape changed. So I just found, again, part of anything in education is keeping it fresh and a little unpredictable for them.
Absolutely. That's what, you want ritual and you want predictability. But then after that's established, it gets boring. And then you want to vary it. And part of being a good teacher is knowing when do you bring in the unpredictable and when do they need that safety net around them. Padma?
I just had a question about something earlier before we leave it at the break on the specific gravity. You mentioned the child, that you can't bring the child from heavy to light. And you mentioned, they just did something bad to hurt somebody. And you say, if you go apologize, it will work. What will work in a circumstance?
Okay, great. Child does something to another child. And so what do you do? Well, the first thing is you want to change the energy. You always think in terms of changing the energy. So what's going to change the energy? Somebody needs to be handling the child who's hurt if they're really hurt. And you might have to do that first and ignore the first child. Just in our conscious discipline things that we do in the afternoons, we will address this in detail later in the class. But just to say a little bit about it now, first, first of all, you need to have sympathetic acceptance of where a child is. It's that non-resistance, sympathetic acceptance. That doesn't mean that you are encouraging accepting the behavior. But can you get into why that happened? Okay, why did that child do that? Were they feeling...
Wish I have a wonderful example.
Oh, good, Lorna.
We were doing a puzzle. I have a puzzle out in my room. I have an intermediate class, which is 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. So I have a puzzle out often to do during dull moments, during filler time. And there was a puzzle they'd all been working on for quite a while. It was a big one. Usha used to come in a lot and do our puzzle. And they got to the point, I walked in one day, and Sandy was in there, and they were finishing. And they'd gotten to the part where there were 3 pieces left. And I walked in and the kids announced, there's 3 pieces missing. The last 3 pieces are missing. I said, oh man, I'm sorry. Well, let's start looking for it. One of the kids was actually in the recycling and they were dumping it out to look for it, to make sure that they were going to find these 3 pieces. Well, after a few moments we realized there were 3 kids holding on to 3 pieces of puzzle because they all wanted to put the last piece of the puzzle in.
Me.
And I was just stunned. I couldn't believe it. I said, because eventually we realized this was what was going on. And it was all defensive. Well, they knew I was. Well, it wasn't so bad. Well, he did it too, And so I said, after I got over my little moment of, oh my gosh, why would you do such a thing? Then I said, so what was going on here? What was happening? Why did this happen? Well, I wanted to put the last piece in the puzzle. And I said, that's pretty special, huh? Everybody feels real special about putting, yeah, it would be really neat. So then I said, if we're going to do a puzzle again, we have to figure out how to do this, because I don't want to bring out another puzzle and go through this again. So then they all had ideas about, well, we could do that. We could all save 1 piece. They came up with 20 different ways that they could go through this. And then, so that helped shift it some, but there was still this, kids feeling guilty and kids feeling bad, and they were looking at each other. And this was a glow-in-the-dark puzzle. And the thing that they were waiting for, that they talked about before, was seeing how it glowed in the dark. So the next thing that happened is I just said, why don't we, now that we're finished with the puzzle, weren't we going to see how it glowed in the dark? Yeah, we were going to do that. And it was on a board. And we had to go to there was a bathroom in our room that has no window, so it was real dark. We need to take it into there. So they picked up the board, and they were all together. It was like carrying the king. There was kids underneath, and there were kids all around, making this procession to the bathroom. And they went in the bathroom, and we put it on the floor, and everybody gathered around. They shut off the lights, and there was this big, oh, wow, isn't that cool? And Sandy came in from the other room going, what's going on in here? What's so cool? And she had to come in the bathroom and see. And after that, it was not a problem. All the energy had just shifted up to, now we all enjoyed it, and it was a good experience, and it was a happy time, and we celebrated, and then we were done. But it took several steps to get to that point. It wouldn't have worked for me to say, let's forget about this, or let's move on and try to skip all that transition.
But when it's one child, I think a lot of times sympathetic acceptance, your arm around them.
Meaning non-judgment.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm saying, I understand you all wanted to put the piece in the puzzle.
You left her out of the game because you felt like you weren't going to have as much fun. But here, we include everybody. It's one of our, we have about 4 school rules, not many. And we include everybody. If you want to play with your friends alone, you can do that at home. But we include everybody here. And that's how I expect you to do. And if that's not good enough, go get some water. Get them moving. Always remember, what's the answer when you're in a heavy state? Get them moving. But I want to point out, and I'm going to come to you, Beth, that usually when you have a discipline problem, it's not because they're heavy. It's because, think about, they're holding the puzzle. They're not unmotivated. They want to finish this puzzle. It's because they're in contractive ego active. So I want to be sure you understand that a lot of times the kids who are going to give you the most problems, they're ego active. They're not heavy. We're not saying the heavy kids are the kids who are the discipline problems. No, they're the kids you can't get moving. They're not motivated in any way. What's her name who wrote Positive Discipline, I think was her. Jane Nelson says, it's easier to breathe life. It's easier to tame a tiger than breathe life into a corpse. And when we have people who come to our school and they say, I don't know if my child can work here because he's not this still. They'll come in and the kids are just all, whatever the teacher's doing, and we say, stay all day. See how much movement we have. Just because they have a lot of energy and activity doesn't mean that we can't work with them. Energy's a good thing. We got to help focus it. So those kids were in contractive ego-active, not expansive ego-active, right? They weren't moving higher. They were moving into more and more me. So just to point out that usually when you have a big problem like that, it's not because a child's heavy. When a child's heavy, the problem's usually just between you and them. They won't do their handwriting. In fact, come up here, Sonali and Karen, and show us what it looks like, would you? Right now. You don't want to? Come on. You said you would.
So we just want to show you something that can happen on the playground and has happened on our playground. We're having PE, and the PE teacher is doing an activity. The kids are all playing a game, all except for Sonali, who's over sitting on the bench. And so just as an example, so Sonali, I noticed that all the kids are playing the game and you're over here on the bench. Can you tell me what's up? How about some water?
I don't want.
Yeah. Have you been drinking lately? We've just had lunch, so I know she's eaten because I checked her lunchbox. Okay. Can you come join in the game? Can join in the game? Is there a problem with the game? Do you know how to play the game? You know how to play the game? Do you like this game? Yeah, you like the game? Would you like to come join in the game? Can I help you? Okay, you know what, Sonali? You better watch out, because you know what happens sometimes? Your ordinary, unassuming teacher can turn into a dinosaur.
Humor works a lot of the time. So it's not like, oh, okay, we're going to have to give them a threat and have them avoid pain. Humor is one of the best things. I remember one time I had a class and we'd done all this paper cutting work, and there was little slips of paper. We'd had the best time all over the floor. And Tim Shantz, some of you know him, who was doing some kind of a science activity. And so we'd gone a little late, and the kids were ready for lunch. They were hungry. It was time for a snack, and I couldn't get the kids to help pick up. Okay, we're not going to have recess till you pick up. I'm into my. And so, the light kids were all going around picking up paper, and everybody else is just running around. And then all of a sudden, I see several children are over at the trash can giggling. And then a couple more kids go over to the trash can. And then I notice people are picking up paper and taking it over there. And I go over there to see what's happening. Tim has drawn 2 eyes and a mouth right here and put his hand, which is a whole lot bigger than mine, over the trash can and was going, feed me, feed me, feed me. And so everybody wanted to pick up a piece of paper and feed him. So humor is one of your very best tools. And again, but what was her purpose? Get her moving. You want to try to get the child. Intense activity is the answer to heavy energy. You know how they recommend if you're depressed, what's the very most important thing you should do? Get exercise, walk. Of course, if you're depressed, it's hard to do it. But if you've got Tyrannosaurus Rex teacher after you, then you'll go. Just ending, because it is time for break, and I know Beth's got a question, and now Leslie's got a question. Just to say some main points I want you to get, and these are in your binder. You have a list of important points. Is work through your leaders. Your leaders will draw the others along. It is so important for you to have them on your side. Leaders do not mean the yes ma'am children. It's not the kids that say anything you want, teacher. Notice which child the rest of the class follows. If you lose that child, you're going to be in trouble, because they have a magnetic energy. Haven't even gotten to magnetism. So much else to talk about. But in conclusion, you're always looking, is the energy expanding or contracting? And if it's contracting, how can I change it? What do I need to do? If it's heavy, can I get people moving? Yes, Beth. You had your hand up a long time ago.
Yeah, I would like to know who put those last 3 pieces of puzzle in.
Well,
I mean, it's just, it's serious. I mean, it is a hard thing to do when you have half your kids are glaring at the rest and they're
Yeah.
mad and angry. And
they all
and
had
it's
their
hard to
piece.
make that decision.
They all had their piece, and they brought them out, and they all put their piece in.
So the ones who took
The ones who
puzzle-
took them. And that's when I said, is that what you wanted to do? And I also said, does everybody feel good about this? Now that you did this, is this what you wanted? Now you feel really happy? No. Nobody felt happy about it at all. So that's when I asked them, how are we going to avoid this again? If we're going to do a puzzle, what are we going to do? And that's when they started
But these
shifting
are
a little.
kids who are much older and are used to
Yeah.
talking things out. I don't know that would necessarily work with first and
Right.
second
These
grade.
are-
I had second and
8,
fourth.
8, 9, 10. I had third, fourth, fifth, sixth.
Leslie.
I just wanted to share something that Chandi taught me that works like a charm with my little kids. And it's what to do when someone does something to hurt the other one. And one guy's crying and the other one's sort of laughing, saying, "Ha ha ha, I bet you fell down, you're crying." Or that happens, and you can't drag them over and say, "Apologize," because they're not in the state to do it and they're not in the state to receive it. What Chandi says is have them look at the person. Just ask the child that hurt the other child, say, "Look at him." And usually that changes everything. Just to stop and see that person.
If you can get them to, and siblings might do that. Yeah, I think that
Siblings.
can be a lot harder in a classroom. There's another trick that brain gym people teach, which is, do you mind putting your hand out and do you do your thumbs together like this, and you do figure eights together, like this, and it brings you into coherence. But sometimes they're so mad they won't even do that. But those are great. Yeah, when you can get them. And then later, I'm not saying having them apologize is not good. Absolutely, then you can say, so would you feel like apologizing now? And they almost always do. And the other one feels so much better about it, they can accept. And we've had kids, unsolicited, even come in the next day with a written apology for somebody. Because they don't resent it if you cannot judge them for what they've done.
It doesn't sound like you're demanding it either. You're saying, would you feel like
Yes,
apologize?
yes. Selene?
The other thing that you can do is, it's like what Usha say, is the intuition. So you know that he's pushing for something. Maybe he wants a toy. So you can say, more for the younger kids, they don't know how to use words. If you really want that toy, you need to go and ask him, can I have that toy? So that helping for the younger ones, they don't know how to use words yet. They don't know how to express. "Oh, I want that."
Let me just conclude with this little story, and this is really the end, and we're going to take a break. But you're all still listening. I wouldn't be doing this if everybody was out there like this. But just to show you what this kind of education, this kind of reflection, this kind of ongoing working with kids can do. We had a child come to the school, first grade, other places. But of course, American consciousness, talk about streams of energy, American consciousness is going all over the world, isn't it? Thank goodness there is an interchange, and we are getting influence from the East as well. But that consciousness, where was I going with? Oh yes, we tend to equate happiness with excitement. When a kid's excited, they're happy. Okay, so we're going to go to Six Flags next week. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. I'm having a birthday party today, and I'm having 12 people, and I'm going to get all these presents. And what happens when a child gets excited like that? At the other end of the spectrum, during the party sometimes, but even or after the party, kaboom, there's a crash, and there's a tantrum, or there's something goes wrong. You can't get overly stimulated and not have some repercussion. It's like physics, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Okay, so let's think about what does it look like when a child's joyful and happy. They could be playing soccer. They could be being very active. But if they are active, their energy's still under control. If you said, stop, somebody's hurt, they can stop. Have you ever seen kids doing an active thing where they actually couldn't stop? Have you, if all of you are teachers or not, all of you who are in the classroom have seen it, where you ask kids to stop and there's a good reason and they literally can't. And that is not joyful, that's excitement. So, as I'm saying, we tend in America to think, oh, I'm going to make my kids happy with Christmas and this activity and this vacation and this gift, and not look for moments where there's calm joy. And for every child that might be different. And we'll talk a lot about this at the Tools of Maturity class, because it depends on temperament as to what activities. But as teachers and parents, start noticing when is my class, and start tuning them into it too. Wow, the energy feels great in here right now. Do you all notice that? That's all you have to say. And they start to tune in. And you come in from playing a cooperative game, and everybody's smiling. Wow, look at you guys, you're all smiling. And you can tell when they come in from recess what it's been like, because some days they come in and they have silent reading, they all get their books, and they're smiling, and they sit down, they start to read. And other days, the first thing you know, the front door goes, kabam! It slams. And whoa, the energy's a little bit like this. So it's another thing to think about when you're watching the energy, and to discriminate that joy doesn't have to be outward and active, although it can be. And sometimes people who are into spirituality think, oh, the spiritual child is the child who's sitting still and quiet and cooperating with everything. And that's not necessarily true. If they're going to grow up and be a great karma yogi, for example, they might be a very active, very physical person even. But their energy is under control when they're in a joyful mood. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Teachers, anything to add? Okay, and then if you turn to the next, this page, notice this observation, because we'll come back to this in the morning. This will be part of your homework for the next class. And then if you turn another page, you'll see a directional relativity chart. Oh my gosh, here's another term. Another word for progressive development is directional relativity. This brings us to that point. What does relativity have to do with anything? And, the whole thing about everything, truth is relative. Is truth relative, or is truth truth? Yes, both and. Yes and yes. So there is an ideal, certainly truth, cheerfulness, cooperation, harmony. These are the ideals. But not always are we ready to get to that point. And is there not something else? For example, let me give you the example we hear over and over, which is, if you heard that an alcoholic or a drug addict had gotten clean and had gotten a job and was saving their money to open a business in order to get rich, wouldn't you think that was positive? And wouldn't that be, compared to being a drug addict or an alcoholic, wasn't that a great thing? It sounds ego-active, but it's the right direction, isn't it? What if you heard that Gandhi quit his work for the liberation of India and went out and got a job in a law firm so he could, invest in the dot-com bust and get rich? Would that be the right thing, the best thing? No. So that's what directional relativity means, and it's something to keep in mind when you're asking everybody in the class to conform to the same, ideal you have. Sometimes that's just not reasonable. This is where the calm acceptance comes in, or the sympathetic acceptance to where they are, understanding where they're coming from, what it looks like to them, even if it's totally selfish. How does it look to them, and how can I move them along to their next step? We always want to go to the next step. So I talked about truth being universally rooted and that many other systems relate to education for life. Let's look at this little chart for a minute. This is kind of a review. And what are the qualities? I've left some of it blank so you can fill it in, because then you might remember better if you write it down, right? So what's a quality of a light person? Anybody? Give me an adjective.
Helping.
Helpful.
Cooperative.
Happy, compassionate.
Willingness to do.
Willingness is huge. Willingness. Okay. Interested in helping others. Those are great adjectives. Okay, and then what are the qualities of heavy? Inert. What's the opposite? Unwilling. Unwilling. Unmotivated. Okay, now describe the ego-active energy.
What's in it for me?
Sorry?
What do I get?
What's in it for me? What do I get? Now remember, you all know this, but I keep wanting to say it. There are gradations of this. A person can be ego-active and still be interested in helping others, but what's in it for me is part of it too, you know. There's a continuum here. In its lower levels, the ego-active energy, which some of you may know the term rajasic. Mm-hmm. You Indian people, how would you say that word? It's that sort of energy, and when we say that, we're usually meaning this, you know, not the expansive ego-active, and you cannot use the word restless. Mm-hmm. It's restless a lot of the time, and it needs to be focused. And we're going to have a whole class on energy and focusing the energy. And Karen and Sandy, I remembered what a part of that was that wasn't on our list. Part of that class is going to be all those techniques like that we incorporate from Brain Gym and tapping and all those things would be part of that. So we'll talk a lot. This is not the end of energy. Okay, so what's the next column? Motivation. All right, everybody, what are the light people motivated by?
Serving.
Helping others, the desire to help others, or the search for truth, wanting to know truth, wanting. Haven't you ever had that more scientific type child in the class who wanted to know how it worked and why it was so? And maybe they weren't so much into helping others, but they're a person who will get there just by their clarity. They just want clarity about life. So different temperament. Community. Well, that's like helping others. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so ego-active are motivated by rewards. Mm-hmm. And as they get more and less into the ego, they get more interested in a reward for the whole class. That's why class points work so well, because it's something they're all going to share. It's not about me, me, me. It's about us, you know. And heavy would be motivated to avoid pain, or unmotivated, but motivated to avoid pain. I'm wondering where yes. Okay. Another way to talk about these three levels is that the light people are motivated by ideals, or light consciousness. Light energy is motivated by ideals. Ego-active are motivated by, at its lower levels, rewards, but at its higher levels, just action. They're action-oriented. And the heavy consciousness or energy is motivated to avoid consequences. When people are in light energy, they're process-oriented. And then when it's ego-active, it's product-oriented. This is something I've seen a lot in art classes, and all of you who are in the classroom have seen this too, I know. Have you ever had an art class where everybody is just so focused and just the energy is just flowing through them, expressing with color, just creating, right? How many of you had a class where they're saying, Karen, how's this look? Karen, how's this? Am I doing this right? Do you like it? Okay. So what are they in? And one thing that we found works in our art classes a lot to get them back into the process is, we're going to have silence. I'm going to read to you, or I'm going to play music. Sandy was one that she'll read to the kids. So they're listening to the story, and they can't be doing that, and then they come back into themselves and just enjoy the process of creating without worrying about, am I pleasing somebody? Are they going to like it? Is it good enough? Is it right? You know, that insecurity and the unwilling to just express, which probably has come from some bad experiences when they were could have come from that. Okay, Kohlberg. Have any of you heard of Lawrence Kohlberg? Anybody? Everybody used to know about him, but he's a little dated now. But he was a Harvard in the Harvard School of Education, and he did a lot of research on. Sandy, do you know that word? What was his research? Moral development. And it was so interesting because he went to cultures all over the world, and he was looking at the moral development of children, and he found that children all over the world go through kind of the same continuum. Just like Piaget found out that children, at a certain age, they learn to know that something that's taller and something that's shorter, they might hold the same amount of water if the shorter one's bigger around, but before a certain age they just can't. It's just not developmentally there. Well, he discovered similar things in the field of moral education. And guess what? When he broke it down into the 6 areas, he basically said, well, there are 3 types of moral understanding, and the one is don't get caught. And that's where a lot of people stay that place all their lives, don't they? And the second one is follow the rules. And the third one is do what's right. That would be the Martin Luther King. You went to prison for what was right. That's the willingness to sacrifice yourself. That's another characteristic of the very, 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 very light energy. Will sacrifice the self for truth or for justice. Kohlberg has been poo-pooed because it was found many years later that all of his research was with boys, not girls. And when some women educators or psychologists went out and did this research, it was different. Guess why? Women were much more community-oriented, and it was a very different progression. But we won't get into all that detail right now. The parent-teacher role, I find that one real interesting. It's the second one on the bottom. For the heavy kids, a lot of times the parent or teacher's just not effective if they're not willing to take on an authority role, because that's what the heavy kid somewhat needs. Going back to the story I told you about the 3 boys, the one who stayed in the tent and read magazines, guess what he did as an adult? He joined the Army. Is that perfect or what? Heavy energy in the Army, you can't get away with it. And the kid who did the walkabout is in the computer business in Texas. And the kid who did the Hawk, I don't know what he's doing, but I do know he went to college and majored in English and trained to be an English teacher. I don't know if he's teaching, though. And the ego active, the teacher or the parent, is the positive motivator. You figure out how to motivate. Sometimes you have to be a benevolent dictator and tell them, yes, we're going to do this. But mainly you can lead by motivation. And when you have light kids or people that you're working with, you find you become the co-creator of the class and the reality. The kids, Sandy and others, Melissa, have told me so many times, I'll go in, I'll say, wow, that looks great. And they'll say, it was so-and-so's idea. It was so-and-so's idea. Well, great people always give their underlings the credit, I think. But also, they're telling the truth because they set up an activity that inspired the kids, and then the kids came up with things that took it to a step that they never dreamed about. Do you have, Karen, you're nodding like maybe you have an example in mind?
Well, I can't think of a specific one, but I do remember that happening where I just can't remember what it was, but it definitely happens, where you'll have something and then somebody else will say, well, what if we done it? And you're thinking, what a great idea.
Anybody have questions or things to add before we end our morning? Yes, Leslie.
I have a question. I don't know if this is an appropriate time, but I'm going to try.
Okay, if it's not, I'll say talk to me later.
Yeah, thanks. It was on my mind the whole time I was reading chapter 11.
Okay.
And I was thinking about the different kinds, light, ego active, and heavy people.
Uh-huh.
And in my mind, I keep thinking about Sattvic, Tamas, and Rajas.
Uh-huh. Yes.
And it seems like we don't want everybody to be the same. Not everybody's always going to be light. Some people are going to be. And if everything was light, we'd all fly off the planet. There has to be some grounding. There's a place. Inertia's not always bad. So.
You don't think?
I get this feeling like, well, if a kid comes in and this is how they are, we're going to change them. And I don't think that's what you're saying, but
Well, we're going to help them take their next step,
yeah. So
whatever is their next
maybe
step.
is it that some people are the dancers and some people will always be the dance audience and they won't dance. They'll watch. And
Well, you're bringing up really deep questions that,
Like
like we would have to bring up things like reincarnation. Would you, if you believed in reincarnation, the answer might be different than if you didn't, for you. You see what I'm saying? And
you're
so
not saying light is good and heavy is bad necessarily.
I'm saying expansive people are happier. Think about it. How many of you know someone who's really selfish? Just think about that.
And it doesn't mean
Or
that
is
the
that-
light person isn't centered. And centered is grounded.
Yeah.
Is that selfish person happy? That the reality is that the more you consider other realities, the more peace and joy you experience. And the more you focus on me, the less peace and joy and harmony is in your life. And one of the tenets of Education for Life is that there are some truths that all great religions and wise people, maybe who are atheists, can agree on. And that there are character traits, for example, like honesty, kindness, compassion, non-stealing, as it's put in the Patanjali, and of course in the Bible it's "Thou shalt not steal." That these are things that allow people to reach their human potential as in a society, and that's the direction that we're going because it brings joy. And like, we're not saying light just means, light's just not a spacey vata. That's not what we mean at all.
Is there a place
Yes.
for the heavy person?
Well, they're here. Of course there's a
There
place.
has to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it's a place for rattlesnakes. So we love them. They're part of our Creator's play. Yes. Yeah. Yes, Sandy.
I'm getting a sense, and I don't know if I'm off on what you're thinking, it's like there can be you're looking at the positive side of things, like, okay, if somebody maybe isn't heavy, but they can still be grounded, even though they're expansive, they can be a grounded person and a reliable person, and so looking at the positive sides of being, quote, heavy, is that,
I guess so.
Yeah, these words can really, like I said in the beginning, the words and the vocabulary can get in the way. And so I think as you go back home into your classrooms, watch and think expansive, contractive. If it's expansive, what's the energy like? What's the feeling like? And if it's contractive, what is it like? And which produces an energy you want to be in. Yes?
Well, I
Glenda.
have a daughter that when we watched Sesame Street when she was little, we really appreciated Oscar the Grouch. You don't want your kids to be Oscar the Grouch, but you want them to understand that people are like that and it's okay to be like that, and if you're like that and feeling like that, okay. But it's not like you wanted them to be that way.
This is a world of duality. Yeah. Priya?
I just want to say something and acknowledge you, Leslie, because when I read this 18 years ago, I was a little bit troubled as a young educator about labeling. And that's what it felt like. But I feel now, this many years later, as you're introducing it, as it's expanded, and it's not in this triangle, it's in this, that it's really about supporting success. Supporting success for each individual unique soul, every child. So I think we have to be careful. And again, when you're trying to use language to describe something that's so expansive and spiritual, really, ultimately, just looking at it a little bit deeper.
And Leslie, you weren't at the first class, and so one of the tenets, one of the essence of Education for Life, remember, is every soul is an expression of spirit, the divine. And so every single child who walks into your class deserves our love, deserves our unconditional love, and deserves us to reflect back to them the highest that they can be. But we have to be real about what can they be right now. It doesn't help them for us to think they need to be doing this if they can only do this next, If it's to bring it into adults, if they're an alcoholic vet on the streets and they clean up and go get a job with no other motivation but to, I don't know,
Stay off the streets.
then that's a positive step. And to see that in each person there is a soul struggling to find happiness. That's what we're all struggling for. And how do we help them make the next expansive step? Because if they contract, there's going to be more misery, And sometimes we can't do a thing about it except bless them and love them. But sometimes, a lot of the time, we can. So I do appreciate that too. One of the things that I think being in America, we particularly have problems with this because we believe in everybody should have equal right to education. This is a democracy. But the reality, and yes, those things are true. Everybody should have the right to reach their potential. But if you've worked in the schools and if you've worked with a broad range of people, not everybody has exactly the same potential. And we can help people more if we see what are they struggling to achieve next, than to have some ideal that's up here. Like I said, in our first years, a lot of kids came to our school from another private school that had started only a couple years before we had. And they had all the same kinds of ideals about the kind of education they wanted for their children. And they all started coming and knocking at our door because what was happening was the kids were being little bullies and terrorists on the playground, and there was no order in the classroom, and it was chaotic because they weren't real about what human nature is and what different kids were able to do. And this one woman who's a chiropractor came to me and she said, so she's really used to dealing with energy and things, and she said she was one of the people that started that school, and she said their problem was we knew what we didn't want to be. We didn't want to be like, it's a cookie cutter education. You all have to do this. You all have to pass this test, and you all have to develop in this way, and you have to do it because we say so. We knew what we didn't want to be, but we didn't have a clear vision of what we wanted to be. And I think Education for Life does offer a clear vision, but it is complex, and that's why we've got 7 classes in this series, plus the 3 other classes. Those of you from Portland and those of you from here, you're doing half of the Raja Yoga class. Because what's the other element we haven't even addressed today? Your magnetism. Yes, the kids have energy. Who's the most important person's energy in the classroom? Whoa, it's ours. So how do we keep our energy expansive and light? And we fail. We can't be that all the time, right? But what's important? Do we see it? Are we headed in the right direction? Are we working toward that? And as we develop our magnetism and it becomes stronger, we affect everyone in the class just by that. You don't even have to say a word, just who you are. And you all know that. You all know people you love hanging out with who bring you to a different level. That's why people go to see saints, because the saints look back at them and see your potential. They see the highest you are, and you love to be in that energy, right? And as teachers and parents, that's who we can be. That's what we should strive to be, is to see that child's divine self inside struggling to get out, and we're the person, the helper. That child may be way beyond us as far as their consciousness, but in this life, if they're the little one and we're the big one, we've got the role to be the helper, and sometimes the helping is getting out of the way and respecting them, and other times helping is gently giving guidance. And sometimes it's even saying, no, this is how it is. Because we know, for example, no put downs, no teasing other kids. Because we know from 30 years of teaching experience what happens when you allow that to seep in the least little bit. There goes the joy and harmony in your classroom and in your school.